Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jenny Beal, and this is the Living in Not Knowing section of the Awareness podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Joost Vanhove. Joost is a non-dual coach and trainer from Belgium with an extraordinary range of knowledge and experience. So I'll start by telling you a bit about his background. Joost had deep spiritual experiences of oneness from childhood, which led him to an exploration of spirituality and healing. Initially, he studied linguistics, psycholinguistics, and neurolinguistics, and at the same time, he was trained in breath coaching, transpersonal coaching, and therapy. Other courses followed: NLP, aura and chakra healing, hypnotherapy, and intuitive development. In addition, he followed trainings in shamanism, communication, and various forms of yoga, meditation, energy work, including Reiki. He also studied A Course in Miracles and has followed a number of non-dual teachers, including Francis Lucille. He made use of his wide-ranging studies and interests to create a holistic self-development model that brings together the most effective ideas and methods from a wide variety of teachings and disciplines, combining the rational aspects with the intuitive aspects and the energetic approach with the cognitive. He has many years' experience working with individuals and groups, helping them to discover a joyful, meaningful, fulfilled life with lasting happiness. So, hello, Joost. That's
Did I do all this? Have I done all this?
Yes, over many years.
Yeah, right.
So it's
thank you for inviting me here. Yeah,
you're very welcome. It's such an amazing background, so many different methods and traditions and teachings that you've explored. But I want to start at the beginning and see if you can tell me something about those early childhood experiences of oneness. What happened then?
Yeah, these were actually very important for me for my search. So already at the age of around 5, 6, I had very intense moments of oneness. And I think the earliest memory was when I was lying in bed. I think the first time I was ill, I was kind of feverish. And I was wide awake, and I was lying in my bed as a young kid. And all of a sudden, I had the feeling that I was starting to blow up. I got the size of my room, then I got the size of the house I was living in, and it felt nice. So I just let it happen. Then at some point, I felt myself as big as the commune where we lived in Belgium, which was rather vague to me. And I had seen Earth globes. They had one at our school. So at some point, I felt I was like as big as the Earth. And then it went on. I knew something because astronomy, I already was, as a small child, interested in it. So at some point, I had the feeling I was bigger than the solar system, and it went on and it went on. And I had a feeling that I was encompassing the whole universe. And that lasted in my feeling, for a very long time. But when I came back to my person, it was still light. So that was somewhere spring, I guess. So the night had not really fallen, actually. So it did actually last less in clock time than in my experience. But then my biggest disappointment was the other day. I wanted to talk about it with my parents. Mm-hmm. And I remember I did that for a number of times over those early years. And their disappointment in their eyes was growing all the time, every time I was trying. And then I remember my mother said at one point, so why don't you just, that was during one of the meals, why don't you just eat your sandwiches and play with your friends as all young kids do? And you shouldn't think so much about things. But I said, I don't think about it. It just happened to me. So I would like to know what happened. And then I had a dog, a boxer dog, who was exactly my age. And in my experience, it was my dog. And I also had that experience with my dog when we were sitting together in the garden. I was fortunate to have a big garden. And when I was sitting with my dog, I could have that too, that enormous sense of spaciousness and of peace and tranquility. And actually, it took me until I was 14 or 15 years old that our teacher, our Dutch teacher at school, he read as an example of the old Dutch of the 13th century, he read something from the book of the Flemish mystic Jan van Ruysbroek, The Spiritual Marriage, that would be in English. And there Jan van Ruysbroek said, well, we are all one, we can all melt in the oneness that we are, something like that. And then for the first time I thought, wow, if I am crazy, then I know we are at least two guys who are crazy. So that gave me some kind of comfort. And then I started reading luckily at the library at school, they had many readings of Teresa of Avila, of other mystics. And that's when my research started.
Yes. And what did you learn from those experiences which remained with you through your teenage years?
It was both confusing because I remember sometimes I also tried to talk about it with my peers at school.
Mm.
I knew, I could see on their eyes that they thought I was crazy. So I didn't continue that. So it was both a feeling of on my own with it, and at the same time having some kind of secret.
Yes, yeah.
But the pain of not being able to share it was almost as big as the peace that I had when I was in those moments.
Yes, I can understand that. And what a beautiful synchronicity that your teacher happened to choose as an example of old Flemish.
Because a few years ago we had a class reunion and I talked about it, and he said that he rarely used one of the examples. Yeah. That was a strange coincidence.
Yes, wonderful.
And then, if I may add, when I was 25, I went to India, and I had an address of a spiritual place, an ashram, north of Delhi, actually at the foothills of the Himalaya. It's called the Herakan, where at that time the guru was Babaji, as there are, I think, thousands of Babajis in India, little father. But he had died just shortly before I arrived there. And by some strange coincidence, I wasn't aware of it, they had a fireplace where they say they had been making fire continuously for over 5,000 years. And I have always been crazy about fire. So actually, I spent those 3.5 weeks almost exclusively in the fireplace. And there it was impossible to have negative thoughts and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And other people said that.
Yes.
And I remember when I left, so the lady who was then the temporary leader, she looked at me very angrily and she said, "You went bathing naked in the holy Ganga River." And I thought, gee, what is she talking about? Because at noon, I went upstream at least 800 meters far. No one could see me. And then I went into the Ganga. So I thought she must have had very good binoculars. Then she added, and what is worse, you went into the fireplace without permission, because that's only for people who are at least 3 years brahmacharya, so who are in the Hindu tradition.
Mm.
But
Yes.
and then my search from then on was to know what exactly happened there in that fireplace. Not only to me, but also to other Westerners who, because there were no strict regulations yet, who were there and who felt really good at this.
Yeah. So how did your interest in linguistics and neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics come about? And maybe we should define those terms because not everyone will know.
So roughly, let's put it very simply. Neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics is the study where they research the connection between what people think, what they say, and how they feel. That's if I would summarize it.
Yes.
And actually, I think I was like 15 or 16 when my mother sent me for a 2 weeks holiday in summer to friends who lived in the French-speaking part of Belgium, the southern part. Mm-hmm. And while learning some French, I was experiencing that I was thinking differently.
Mm.
Then I noticed already that our language is actually influencing the way we think. And like later on, that there are many examples, like in the indigenous Northern American most Northern American languages of the indigenous people, like the Hopi, they have no abstract nouns. Like the word work or love doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. They all only have to be working or to be loving, which influences their thinking in a huge way. Because when we people meet, we say like, "Oh, how is your relationship?" And we assume that people understand what we mean, but it can mean anything. How is your relationship?
Yes, I can remember, I can't remember who it was. There's one teacher who said the language of duality, non-duality, is all verbs. There are no nouns.
Right.
And
that's the same
so that
thing.
Obviously influences your thinking. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm. Yes.
And then when so I did actually my thesis at the end of my linguistic studies on dreaming. So in Antwerp, there was the first European dreaming laboratory that was in, let me see, around 79, 80. Mm-hmm. And I had volunteers who came to sleep, and the idea was that I would wake them up in the middle of the night or during a REM sleep, when the assistant was sure or was pretty sure they were in a dream. And then I would have them tell about their dreams. So I was actually studying the language people use when they talk about dreams.
Yes.
But what struck me there, and this was also an important lesson, that people can have there can be two different reality that are mutually exclusive and still happen at the same time. I give you an example of my son. You have met my son. When he was very small,
Yes.
he sometimes had nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was 6 or 7, and we had gone to a theme park in Holland where they have representation of some of the Grimm fairy tales.
The fairy tales. Oh, yes.
And there was one very striking image of the wolf knocking at the grandmother's door with his tongue hanging out. And I remember, so this had made a huge impression on Robin, on my son. Mm. And the night after that, he awoke in the middle of a nightmare. And I set him up, I looked at him, and the moment he opened his eyes, he became even more afraid. And afterwards he said, "Oh, Dad, I thought I was looking at the wolf, at the angry wolf."
Oh.
So the only reality for him was that he was completely safe in his bed, sleeping safely at our home. At the same time, his experience with the visuals, the auditive, and he talked about how badly the wolf smelled out of his beak, all the senses gave him the real experience that he was chased by the wolf.
Gosh, yes.
And that, so I came to know that in the dream laboratory, and that was, to me, by the way, I also worked for a few years at the university in the epistemology department. So the theory of knowledge, yes. How do we know things, and how the science, how do we know for sure that we know something?
Yeah.
So this was also, the epistemology was also an important trigger to find out how do things work in life.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting connection between the language we use and the words and spiritual teaching, because to find the meaning we're always told we have to look beyond the words, and we're using words as pointers. Spiritual teachers or the ancient sages are using words as pointers, but mostly when we're reading ancient texts, we're actually reading a translation. Yeah. And in order to translate accurately, the translator himself must have gone beyond the words to where the sage was pointing, if he's going to understand the meaning and translate it into his own language. And it's interesting because he wouldn't necessarily know whether he'd been successful in that, and neither would we, the readers.
Yeah, and I have found that it works both ways. So when we give language to a thing or to an experience, we can refer to it, which is handy. Yeah. But at the same time, language very often shrinks the experience.
Yes, yes.
And then later on, when I started to do psychotherapy, I also used that idea, that insight for helping people not to be identified with the meaning they gave to things. I often give the example of an instrument that we all know. It's a vertical rectangle with a hook in the middle, and it's an instrument with which we can pass through walls. We call it a door. Mm-hmm. So there is one here.
Yes.
Luckily, we have, when we see this rectangle in the wall, we already presume that it's an instrument by which we can go through the window, through the wall.
Yes.
And that's good. Otherwise, if we would not have that fixed meaning, every morning by waking up, we would have to feel our way out of the room. Otherwise, we would never get out. So
yes.
This is a really simple example, but people set themselves stuck all the time by language.
Yes.
All the time.
Yeah.
And by holding on to the interpretation they once gave to something.
Mm.
But
and sometimes by holding on to the very literal meaning. So if you're taking just the literal meaning of the words, then you're not seeing the words as a pointer to something that's beyond all words. And it's like with poetry. If you're going to appreciate poetry, you have to go to where the poet is pointing rather than that literal meaning. Yes. And I think that's how poetry can just somehow expand our view rather than the contraction that you were speaking of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And spoken language, I guess there's a difference there, because when you're talking face to face with someone, to me the words spoken seem more like a tuning in mechanism. So you tune in to the thoughts and the feelings and the understanding of the person that you're talking with. And especially if you're having a dialogue in satsang with a spiritual teacher, then your openness and your teacher's openness become, in fact, there always are, one openness in which that understanding resides, and the words are just not important at all, and you might not even remember them. It's they're just that tuning in mechanism, aren't they?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because when you're together with someone, and even now we are online, our audience is online. Of course, it would have been a little better if we would have been together in the same room.
Yes,
I admit it, but even now we see each other. There is much more interaction and understanding than if you would just chat.
yes, on email
with
or something.
the written word, yeah.
Yes. So going on to breath work, what sparked your interest in breath work?
Well, when I was ready studying at the age of 22, I had the opportunity to study one more year abroad, and I had studied Scandinavian languages, so I went for a year. That was the idea, to Uppsala, to Sweden. Uppsala is the big university city in Sweden, and before I left, I went to my favorite bookshop because I knew I would be gone for at least until New Year, but maybe for the whole year. So I took a few books. And when I went to the counter, a very tiny book, luckily it was a tiny one, fell on my head from one of the upper shelves. And it was like handmade, stapled together, and it said rebirthing. The art of breathing, something like that. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Then I read it on the long train ride from Belgium to Sweden. And when I was enrolling for my course there in Uppsala, I saw a big paper announcing a rebirthing weekend. And I said, I have to do that, even if I know that my budget actually doesn't allow it. But I did that weekend, and it was that opened my world. Yeah, that was another big opening, just by breathing like for at least 1 hour like this. At some point, I had to laugh so much, and of course, I knew it was tension that I was releasing, that everyone in the room, we were like 25 people, started to laugh in a very deep way. And there I felt that same peace that I felt when I was a little boy.
And another amazing piece of synchronicity here.
Yeah,
both the
right.
book and the big poster.
Yeah, right.
It's quite extraordinary. So, did you pursue it beyond that that weekend course? You went on to study it
at that
further.
time, I did something that I would not advise anyone. I did make big mistakes in a therapeutic way. So I started to just anyone who was interested to teach them how to breathe.
Right.
And then at the end of the year, when I came home, my mother said that there is an interesting, there was some kind of a lecture that she took me the day I arrived in summer after that year in Scandinavia. And there I met something who was very much into rebirthing. And that triggered to take a 2 weeks course in southern France. And then I did a 4-year training in spiritual and breath coach. And that was the real start of my career as a coach and as a therapist.
Right. And then at some point you became interested in non-duality, and what was that, through books or through the connection with a teacher?
That was actually, I had read in a magazine about Isaac Shapiro coming to Amsterdam, to the Netherlands. And more than a year later, I found again that magazine, and then I saw there was a telephone number, and I phoned, and they said, "Wow, that's a long time ago. We put that article, but you are lucky because within 2 weeks he'll be back in Amsterdam." And I remember that was a Sunday morning. Normally it would take like 4 hours from Belgium to Amsterdam, but in a little more than 2 hours. I don't know how that went. We were there at the center where he was having satsang, and this triggered many things for us. And then at some point, we were really disappointed by a non-duality teacher. That was a difficult lesson for me, for my wife too, but if I speak for myself.
Yes.
And I had enough for living teachers.
Yes.
Then I already knew a course of miracles. Then we taught a course in miracles for at least 10 years. Until friends of ours, Frank and Kathy, said we knew that they had found Francis Lucille, and then at some point we also ended up with Francis, and then I knew, yeah, this is something different. This is a living teacher with the right attitude.
Yes. And you studied all sorts of other things. I'm not sure whether that was before that or during that period, like the aura and chakra healing and the hypnotherapy and shamanism, yoga and things like that. How did those fit in?
And also NLP, neurolinguistic programming, which was actually unavoidable with my background.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't know how it is in England, but in Belgium, it has a bad name because people think you use it to program other people, like in sales stuff. But that's not what it is about.
Yes, that is a
It
view over
teaches
here
you
as well. Mm.
the same in the UK.
Yes, yes, it is. I mean, it is taught on, sales
It
training
is also taught to
seminars. Yeah.
salespeople, yeah.
Mm.
But actually, the big NLP teachers, they talk about how we have been hypnotizing ourselves, how we have been programming ourselves in a very limiting way through our thinking and through our language.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And there, to me, to this day, NLP still did the best job in how should I say that? In charting all the important parameters that determine whether we are functional as persons, whether we are happy or not.
Right.
So they call it the meta programming.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of that?
Yeah, I will give one example is that when you think back of something of the past, let's say you had a great holiday in Spain and you think back of it, you can do it basically in two ways. You can think back of something in the past while you see yourself as if you see yourself in a movie, as if you watch a movie of yourself. That's a dissociated memory.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also have an associated memory where you are again the person in the place you were and you look from your eyes where you were then. Anytime we have an associated memory, we easily pick up the feelings we had at that time.
Mm-hmm.
While when we have a dissociated memory, we cannot really feel what we felt at that time.
Yes. Yeah.
And very often people, many people, also people who are into spirituality, into coaching, never thought of that, of the importance of that.
Yeah.
Like at some point, I worked with a guy, a man who was then around 40, I guess. And by the way he was talking to me the first session, I was almost sure he only had dissociated memories. And when I saw him back the second time, he just came from his first real holiday with his wife and his two kids. And he said it was a great holiday, but I'm 2 days home and it's gone. Mm-hmm. And then what I mainly did in that session was helping him to think back of their last, they had a last very nice dinner with friends on one of the Greek islands. And I made him go into his body again at that place where they were sitting at that restaurant with the view he had there. And it took me 1.5 hours with all kinds of tricks and techniques, but he got it. And then a month later, I saw, because I knew his wife already, I saw his wife and she said, Joost, what did you do to my husband? That's the husband I wanted to have in the first place. I'm amazed what you do with him. But I didn't talk about anything content. I just helped him to associate again with good memories. That's the only thing I did.
Well, why do you think people dissociate?
Well, both have their advantage and their disadvantage. As a rule, it's useful to dissociate from difficult and bad events.
Yeah.
And it's good and interesting to associate with experiences that we experienced as positive.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if we only dissociate from the so-called difficult and bad events, we won't always learn the lessons that we can learn from it. So it's a matter of using both, of being able to make the switch work. What I did in this case with this guy. So the switch was stuck in one side, and I just oiled the switch.
Yeah.
So that there was choice.
Yes, yeah.
But that overview of all the parameters that determine our happiness has a few disadvantages in the way the first NLP teachers made it. One advantage is that there are many parameters. According to how you divide them, you have between 30 and 50 parameters, which is not very handy. And they are not all of them are always in place in a certain situation. So from 1995 about on, actually in 1995, several people started to ask me in the course of a few months' time, Joost, there are so many techniques, so many ways for self-development. So what should I start with? Can you advise me a book to start with for people who are new, also into spirituality? And now it's a wilderness. It's a wilderness, but even then, it already started to be very diffused. So, and that made me think, like, the question that never left me since then was, what happens actually in the way people think, people feel, people act, so in their life attitudes? What happens when people make a shift towards feeling better, towards more lasting happiness? And that was the research that took me like more than 20 years to develop the PAVA.
And you used quite a few different traditions and techniques in...
Yeah, so I actually, from that point on, I asked to almost everyone I met, what is for you the most important thing in life? Also people whom I met on the street, whom I didn't know, but certainly also the people who did my trainings. I built that in the training, people, individual people in my private sessions. Even I started to ask those things to my family, and they were not used to that. And then it took, of course, people said all kinds of vague things that they said. At the number one was always happiness. When you ask, what do you want the most people start with happiness. Others say, I want to have wisdom. I want to have spiritual enlightenment, all those things. But then I wanted to know what for them were the characteristics. And that took me a few years to find the way in it. Like, people always answered like in 4 categories that needed to be. Like about 65 people started, if you ask, how do you know when you go towards that wisdom, happiness, whatever they call it? And most of the people say, well, I know it because I am able to reach my important goals. And then that is, of course, a good health, having a good relationship, a good job, enough money, all those things.
Yes.
And let me see if my calculation is right, because I'm not so good at calculation. So that was like 65 people who started with that, being able to reach my goals. So a lesser part of the people, I think that would be like 20% said, oh, I know it because I have a feeling of being content, of being fulfilled, being satisfied, of experiencing joy. So that was the first category. And an even lesser percent, like 10%, said, oh, I know it because I get meaning when I have meaning, when I have added value in my life. Added value both for myself and for others.
Yes.
And then if my calculus is right, there is 5% left that started with, if you ask, so how do you know you are going towards more happiness? Then that 5% said, I know it because then I have a feeling of love. Either they said love, peace, oneness, connectedness.
Yes.
So, and the funny thing, so we have those 4 categories. One is being able to reach your most important goals. The second, the feeling of being fulfilled, content. The third, experience meaning in life. And the fourth, a feeling of peace, of oneness, connectedness, of love. And to the degree that people were able to experience those things of the last category, meaning or love, the first 2 categories, and certainly the first category, like realizing your goals, was either less important or came by itself.
Right. Yes.
I don't know whether I make myself clear.
Yes, you do. So people move from that first goal, which is very clear and precise. I've got all of these goals and I want to meet them. And then they gradually move towards that much less precise goal from a language point of view.
Yes,
but,
precisely, from a language. And also much less, you can point at it much less because there is no less material thing. If you wanted to have a house and a good job and a partner, you can feel that, you can touch it, but the other things are less touchable. So
yes. So how do they make that transition, or how do you help them to make that transition?
Well, actually, I was not satisfied. To me, that was actually the beginning. Then I knew what were people's characteristics of whatever they called happiness, wisdom, enlightenment. But then I wanted to know what exactly happens with people when they make a shift towards more of that happiness, or when they make a shift towards less of that happiness. And by that time, that was towards the end of the previous century, there were many happiness experts, and they all had their 21 rules of happiness, 12 laws of spiritual freedom, so on, with many advices, also many contradictory advices.
Yes.
And I actually wanted to clean out all this. Like one example of the contradictory advices, there are people who say, well, if you want to be happy, you always have to know exactly where you're going to. You need to set goals. Why? Other people say, if you want to sabotage your happiness, the best thing is to set goals. You should get rid of goals in all possible meanings. So, and of course, I sensed in some way what both meant, but I wanted to have clear criteria. When is it good to have goals, and from what point on do they become a burden?
Yes.
Another thing, just one more example. Some experts say, well, you should never accept anything. You should never accept anything. While others say you should always start accepting completely everything that is. And here we come right into the language thing.
Yeah.
Because as we see, Pava, the P is for pure and open perception. The A stands for complete acceptance. Then the V stands for having a clear vision. And then the last A stands for effective action.
Right.
We will go into that. So, but the order is also important. The more you can see a situation exactly as it is, without all your interpretations, the easier it is to accept the situation as it is, without any resistance. And by doing that, you will be able to see what you can change about it. So you will be able to make a vision. Yes. And this leads to effective action. Then you will be able to have maximum effect with minimal effort.
Yes, yeah.
But as soon as the PAVA model started to develop, and of course I talked about it with many psychologists, psychiatrists, colleague trainers, coaches, everyone whom I thought was a wise person. So you have at one hand all those interviews I did with people. Then you have my sharing with other people. And of course, an important thing was comparing all different kinds of therapies and of coaching methods. So I wanted to know what exactly has happened to you when you made that positive shift, whether it was through breathing deeply half an hour, or to taking ayahuasca, or to meditate in silence, or whatever. And I found that there was a common thread in all those people. And one common thread is that something changed in their perception, that their interpretation that they gave, it opened up, that they were able to let go of their fixed interpretation of
and was that something that happens by chance, or was it something they do?
Sometimes it happens by chance because, of course, I was comparing very different ways and methods of personal growth. But it was also interesting to interview people who are not interested in personal growth, but who did the best training there is for everyone, and that's life itself. Yes. Life always gives the best opportunities for every one of us. I also wanted to know what happened when, either through a removal, through a sickness of someone, or to illness of yourself, to a deceased, being fired at work, whatever, through good and bad things, what happens with people when they are able to make a shift towards being more lasting happy, or what happens also when they make a shift to being less happy. And I found, but that took about 20 years, that there are always 4 attitudes in the place, namely perception, acceptance, vision, action. So I briefly mentioned the positive side of the 4 parameters. Let's quickly go over it. When you have a pure and open perception about the situation, you are able to see the situation with as little fixed interpretation as possible. Plus, you are able to see the situation from all possible angles. You are able to see it from yourself, with your eyes, your ears, with your feelings, your ideas. You are also able to put yourself in the position of the other. You are also able to put yourself in the position of the system, and that's a bit more abstract, but people do that without being aware. The system can be a partner relationship, a family, can be a company, can be your neighborhood, your village, whatever. And you are also able to put yourself in the position of the universe and to watch that situation from the universal perspective. The minus side, when people, so you have like, from the beginning, I had the idea of a mix panel with 4 slides. And the more of the slides are up, the more we are guaranteed to go towards more happiness. The more of the slides are down, we are guaranteed to go towards unhappiness. So I just explained the up part of the perception. When we have a low level of perception, then we are stuck in one interpretation and we are stuck in only one perceptional position. Yes. You can be as stuck by, for example, there are people who always only see a situation from their own perspective, but there are also people who always see every situation from the perspective of someone else and who forget their own perspective. Of course, all this has to do with upbringing. But then my task, I remember when I was writing my first book on the Pava, I had written a bigger book before that. And I think I was glad that I said, well, those 4 parameters, that's going to be easy. A simple book, 30, 40 pages. And I showed it to a few proofreaders. And they said to me, Joost, you are crazy. You know exactly what it is. A positive, the plus pole of perception and the minus pole, but you will have to explain it in detail. And you have to explain in detail how exactly people get that pure and open perception. And that's why that became my biggest book.
Yes.
Which I am translating into English now.
Well, that's very good.
Yeah. So, which is very challenging too.
So what are the techniques that you use to help people
luckily,
improve that perception?
I had techniques from shamanism, from NLP, from cognitive therapy. Actually, I started when I was at university. I went to do psychoanalysis with a professor in Belgium who was then one of the leading guys, Professor Kwakkelbeen, in both Freudian psychoanalysis, but also Lacan analysis. Lacan, who is the big French language guy,
right,
who connected even more language with a psychoanalysis. So luckily, I had all kinds of techniques, and my endeavor was to find what's the easiest way to bring people like from a closed up perception to a more open, free perception.
So does that vary from one person to another, the techniques that you might use?
Well, of course, it helps to see where people are stuck.
Yes.
As I said, the one guy who only had learned to look at it, to look at everything in a dissociated way, then I had to learn him to also go into the feeling of an experience again.
Yes.
So, but actually the direction is for everyone the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's for and that's what was I missing in for example, in the NLP model of the meta programs.
Yes. Yeah. So,
And then the funny thing is, I took the words that we had. Luckily, we had the same word in Dutch as in English. The words that came the closest to the attitudes that people adopted whenever they made a positive or a negative shift.
mm-hmm.
I use the word perception, like in German, you have wahrnehmen. Nemen, you take the things as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And in Latin, the etymological meaning is you take it with stress. You take it the way it is.
Yes.
In which we have the same, waarnemen.
Mm-hmm.
But the strange thing with language is that perception has become, the last decennia, people use it often in the reverse meaning, like meaning only, oh, what is my interpretation?
Ah, right, yes.
But still, I chose for the original etymological meaning. That's why I still took perception.
Yeah.
The problem is even bigger with the second parameter, acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Because acceptance can mean anything, but I had to make my own definitions. Like, to accept something means that you have no resistance against how things are right now.
Yes.
And the other day I was talking to my daughter about when I was developing the model, there was one thing that I had been having resistance all my life. That was like when people clean up in the kitchen and they don't have much time, they put everything, the dirty dishes, in the sink.
Mm.
And the funny thing, when I met my wife more than 30 years ago, sometimes she did that. And she had a cleaning lady who did the same. And it would freak me out. So, like when I was writing in 2015, I used that example and I used the techniques that I had developed to go from resistance to acceptance. So one of the techniques that plays a role is that you feel the resistance in your body.
Right.
And give the resistance all the space.
Mm-hmm.
Among other things. And I worked with that. And the funny thing is, a few years ago, my daughter was for half a day at home. And then we had to leave. And then after that, she had to leave too. And I came home the first, guess what I saw? My daughter had put all the dirty plates in the sink to a point that I couldn't even take a glass of water from the tap. And I had to laugh so much. And at that time, I knew that I had let go all of my resistance against that. To me, that was a clear example. It took me only 20 seconds to just remove it and to take some water.
Yes.
Before that, it would take me a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and like 10 times as much time to just make the sink available.
Yes. There seems to be quite a close parallel between these techniques that you use and the way you solve or help people solve those problems, and what Francis Lucille teaches, because that's also about feeling the resistance in the body and noticing resistance and
right, and
noticing where it comes from, and
right, and in the whole Kashmir tradition, which is a very old form of yoga, they do very similar things.
Yes. So I imagine that your method would work both for people who don't come with an interest in spirituality. They just want want happiness. But also people who have started to have an interest in non-duality and are following a spiritual teacher. I can see that it works for both.
And also it works whether people are into spirituality, but it works for people who are completely new to anything about personal development, and for people who have been in it for a long time. Everyone gets deep insights about the way they function.
Yes, yeah.
And I keep having the commentaries that it's really 4 universal parameters that directly determine our happiness and all possible meanings.
Yes, yeah. So these podcasts that I do, the subtitle for them is "Living in Not Knowing." What does that mean for you now? To some extent, it I think relates to the acceptance side of your model, but maybe there's more to it than that.
Well, since the first parameter, perception, is the first and determines all the rest, not knowing is essential, which means not clinging to one possible interpretation. And I have seen that, like, with 3 types of people, like with the mystics. So Jan van Ruysbroek was one of the older Flemish mystics, but also modern day mystics. They don't cling to one meaning.
Yes.
And they leave it open all the time.
Yeah.
The really big scientists do the same. They are able to momentarily put aside everything they know, which is not easy.
Yeah.
To look at things fresh. And then they are able to see new things. And the third group of people are the artists. They do the same. They are able to see things as they are, separate from all our ideas about it.
Yes, yeah.
And by the way, which is important for the people who are interested in a non-duality, but that only came clear to me while I was writing my first book in 2015 about the Pava method. I knew there was something missing. I was halfway the book, and I talked with colleagues and I said, listen, should we skip the action? Because very often the action part comes by itself, but then I saw in the interaction with the other 3 Pavas, action was really important. Then at sometimes I thought I was missing 1 or 2 more parameters, but then I had a dream that I have always been fond of stones of any kind. So I remember the second big holiday we did with the kids when they were small. The first day we were doing a hike in the mountains, I think it was in the Alps. They saw me looking at the ground, and my daughter and my son said at the same time, one was 8, the other was 10, Dad, we have no pockets today. So everything you found, you will have to carry it on your own. But I guess the year before I had them carry all the stones I found. So, but now they simply have to carry them all yourself. Anyway, my dream, I was surrounded by 4 pillars of gems. One was a pillar of amethyst, of indigo, so that's the color of perception of indigo. Mm-hmm. The other pillar was a very nice, very expensive, I guess, emerald. Mm-hmm. The green transparent. The third one was a topaz, a yellow topaz, and the fourth was a ruby. So these are also the 4 colors of the pava. Right. But these pillars were like in a square around me, and in my dream I was hovering. I was lifted up, and I saw that the 4 pillars came together in a point. And at some point in my dream, like that point fell together with my heart. And I felt the peace, the joy of like if you have been looking for something and then all of a sudden you have the aha, wow, that's how it fits.
Yes.
And at that point, it became a lucid dream. I knew that I was dreaming. I said, wow, that is the missing point. It's not like a classical, how do you call it in English? A graph, like what they do with the votes, the polls for the different parties.
Oh,
like in graphics, they see they have so many
bar charts. Yes, yeah.
Bar charts. Yeah, it's not bar charts, but the 4 pavas come together in one point, which means when you are in a situation where you have complete acceptance, both with the outer world and your inner world, then at the same time you have an open perception. Then you have a clear vision. You are only busy not with the problems, but with what you want, with happiness. And then you are also in a natural flow of action where you have maximum effect with minimal effort. And that's the oneness experiences that we all had, everyone. But the thing is that many people think, wow, oneness experiences, you only have them every 10 years with a birth, or when you have a special orgasm, or when you are in nature, or when you are maximum thrilled in a concert. That's true, you can have them there too. But what is actually at least as important is that people, and I help people to determine those very usual, simple, banal moments that sometimes last only 5 seconds, that we are in oneness.
Yes.
We go out and we just feel a ray of the sun beaming on our face. We are on the tram and we see a child smiling. Mm-hmm. We taste a new tea and we say, what a nice taste. Mm-hmm. So the simple oneness experiences that we forget that we presumably are a body-mind.
Yes, yes.
And then I developed exercises for people to how would you say that? To use that energy and to connect it with other areas in their lives where they are not that efficient or happy.
Yes.
To transpose it. That's the word I was looking for.
Right. Yes. Yes. I mean, I recognize that progression through Pava because it relates very much to the sort of work I was doing when I was working as a consultant in a very simple, practical way.
Tell me. I'm curious.
I go to a client, and I was always sent to clients where I hadn't a clue what to do. I had a rough idea of the problem, and I go and I'd interview lots of people, and then I'd sit down, and there would be this weight. What on earth can I recommend? And what I would do, I would let go of all of it. So there was the perception to start with, the perceptions of everything I was told, the feeling of the organization. So that was there. But then there was just the acceptance. I don't know. I don't know what to do. And I'd go and get a cup of coffee, and I just completely let go of the problems and everything I'd learned about the client. Just completely let it go. And then suddenly there would be that vision. It wouldn't come from me. It came from the universe. Okay, this might work. And then that leads to action. I go and discuss with the senior management and so on. Yeah. So, but the extraordinary thing was that was something that happened on every single project. It happened over and over again. And it wasn't something I tried to do. It was just something that just naturally happened. And so I feel that that approach, that method as a very natural one.
Yeah, that's when we are connected with our natural intuition.
Yes, exactly.
And real intuition only can come from oneness.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
As long as we consider ourselves and the other as separate, we'll never have the right intuition.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's beautiful. I think that that's maybe a lovely place to stop, because I think we've probably done.
By the way, I have no idea how long your talks are, your interviews.
Well, they're roughly an hour, and I think we've had maybe more than that.
I'm not looking at watches, so I have no idea how far. No. I trust you. Oh, by the way, if I may just add one more thing. Sure. About language, because a very important thing to me in developing the Pava method was like hearing the people's confusion. Like many people say, like, are you going to accept it, or do you want to do something about it? Where they confuse the second axis, the acceptance, with the fourth, with action. Mm-hmm. That they consider acceptance as the same as the opposite of positive action.
Yes. I've seen that confusion.
And I actually developed, I found like 33 very popular misunderstandings where people mix two of the four parameters.
Yes.
But still, I had to make a choice. So I took I took acceptance for the second parameter.
Yes, beautiful. It's openness, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Yes. So thank you, Joost. I've very much enjoyed our conversation today.
Me too. It's always nice to have conversations with people who have clever questions.
And thank you all for listening.
With pleasure.